Do you believe elected politicians in Minnesota who were aware of this fraud and were complicit in it should be prosecuted? Should there be accountability?
There absolutely should be accountability. It is not normal to prosecute government officials for not prosecuting fraud. That is not a standard I'm aware of that you've advocated or that anyone else has advocated in the Senate.
So do you think it's perfectly okay?
I did not say
if
it's okay.
If let's say Governor Walz or Attorney General Ellison knew about the fraud, benefited from the fraud in terms of bundling votes, benefited from the frauds in terms of collecting campaign finance violations, and deliberately looked the other way. You think that's not criminal conduct?
In that hypothetical, it is not okay. 100% not okay. But also, if you'll permit me, that hypothetical is in fact happening throughout.
Okay, yes, I get it. You dislike Trump. I understand you dislike
Trump,
sir.
Cruz. It is whether I have a standard of accountability.
So let me sir, please do not interrupt me. Please do not.
I'm being clear. I am.
Please do not interrupt me. Please do not interrupt me.
Sir.
You may answer questions after I ask them.
Senator Ted Cruz confronts Robert Weissman of Public Citizen in one of the most intense Senate hearings of the year over alleged massive fraud in Minnesota involving fake daycare centers, autism facilities, and billions of stolen dollars. Watch as Cruz questions whether Weissman's organization is truly pro-democracy or simply pro-Democrat, demanding accountability for elected officials who may have been complicit in the fraud. This hearing exposes the deep political divisions over how fraud should be investigated and prosecuted, with Cruz accusing the witness of defending fraudsters for partisan reasons, while Weissman pushes back on evidentiary standards and the characterization of the Minnesota scandal. Let's dive into the main video.
I want to ask you the same questions I asked Representative Robbins. Number one, how broad do you believe the evidence shows the fraud in Minnesota was?
It's easily in excess of $30 billion when you take everything into account. You've got all of these NGOs, you've got nonprofits, you've got county money, you've got city money, you've got CCAP money, you've got another thing called Great Start. So there are all these piles of money that factor into the fraud. I don't know that anybody can ever determine an exact number, but I kept telling the U.S. attorney when he came out, he said, you got to get your number up, you got to get your number up, and he did. He kept ratcheting up the number, and I kept saying, you got to be at least at $30 billion. So going back to whether Governor Walz knew about it, Governor Walz admitted knowing about the fraud early in his first term, which would say 2020. Well, Minnesota Statute 3.971, Subdivision 9, clearly says that if you are made aware of fraud in a state agency, you are obligated to immediately report that fraud to the Office of the Legislative Auditor. Immediately. The Legislative Auditor is then the body that determines which law enforcement agency to bring into the investigation. Governor Walz did not contact the Office of the Legislative Auditor. He said he contacted the FBI about what? That's not what the law says.
How many organizations receiving taxpayer funds did you visit in total?
How many?
How many organizations or ostensible organizations?
Companies, 200.
Of the child care centers you visited, how many kids did you see?
The only place that I saw children was at KinderCare and New Horizons, which are, in my opinion, legitimate. They're large scale. They have play areas. And they also receive CCAP money, but they're the only places that I saw where there were children present, ever, at any of them.
How about the autism centers? Did you see children? Did you see patients there?
Never. So that's not to say there weren't any, but there were never there. There were never any there. When I was there, never any footprints in the snow, same thing.
Mr. Weissman, you're co-president of Public Citizen, which describes itself as a consumer advocate and a pro-democracy organization. Would you agree that the fraud in Minnesota was staggering and shocking?
I agree that there is fraud in Minnesota. I don't believe these estimates are grounded in any evidence that I've seen. The $9 billion figure was based on a claim just that, well, I think that half of them must be fraudulent. I just heard a comment just saying, boost the number up. But to be clear, and with respect, you missed my testimony, no question there's fraud in Minnesota, and absolutely I share your righteous anger about whatever degree of fraud there was there.
Do you agree that any Democrat politician, or let me be clear, any Republican politician, that had knowledge of the fraud and was complicit should be prosecuted?
I'm not sure what they're being prosecuted for, but also in my testimony, I described also outside of Minnesota the manifold ways that this administration is enabling fraud.
Look, I understand.
Oh,
and the reason, hold on.
The standard is that you want
Sir,
to prosecute
I'm going to
people.
ask a question, and then you can answer it.
Yes, sir.
Your organization describes itself as a pro-democracy organization. I'm going to
Correct.
try to find out if you actually are pro-democracy or if you're simply pro-Democrat and are a partisan. We've seen the Democrats who want to change the topic. So I get you want to testify how much you hate Donald Trump. But I'm quite certain Donald Trump was not running a fraudulent daycare center or a fraudulent autism center in Minnesota. So all of the talking points about how you dislike Trump, set them aside. We will see the Democrats on this committee go down those talking points. Do you believe elected politicians in Minnesota who were aware of this fraud and were complicit in it should be prosecuted? Should there be accountability?
There absolutely should be accountability. It is not normal to prosecute government officials for not prosecuting fraud. That is not a standard I'm aware of that you've advocated or that anyone else has advocated in the Senate.
So do you think it's perfectly okay?
I did not say
If
it's
let's
okay.
let's say Governor Walz or Attorney General Ellison knew about the fraud, benefited from the fraud in terms of bundling votes, benefited from the frauds in terms of collecting campaign finance violations, and deliberately looked the other way. You think that's not criminal conduct?
In that hypothetical, it is not okay. 100% not okay. But also, if you'll permit me, that hypothetical is in fact happening throughout.
Okay, yes, I get it. You dislike Trump. I understand
you
you dislike
Trump, Mr. Cruz. It is whether I have a standard of accountability.
So let me, sir, please do not interrupt me. Please do not.
I'm being clear. I am.
Please do not interrupt me. Please do not interrupt me.
Sir.
You may answer questions after I ask them. You've heard the evidence and testimony about daycare centers with no children, with no toys, with no facilities, with windows that are blacked out. Do you believe it is possible that the officials sending millions of dollars to those fake daycare centers and fake autism centers didn't know what was going on?
Well, what I heard was claims about that, and I too have watched the video. We're both parents. I'm glad that the child care centers don't open their door for someone who's knocking there. I don't view that as evidence that the child care centers are fake child care centers, although I'm sure there are some. My understanding is that state investigators have gone to do their duty at those exact same child centers and have found that most of them actually are operating correctly.
Well, I will say it is disappointing that you had a chance leading a nonprofit that is supposedly pro-democracy to take a principled stand. Instead, you decided to defend the Somali fraudsters because it benefits elected Democrats. That's disappointing. But you know what? I'm going to give you something you're going to like, an opportunity to say all the ways you dislike President Trump, because I'm going to recognize the ranking member who will surely ask you why Trump is terrible and do everything you and he can do to change the topic from the actual topic of this hearing. Ranking Member Whitehouse.
Senator Ted Cruz demonstrated exactly what principled leadership looks like in this explosive hearing. While others might have accepted vague answers and allowed a witness to deflect with partisan talking points, Cruz held the line and demanded real accountability. His questioning wasn't about scoring cheap political points. It was about establishing a fundamental principle that should unite all Americans regardless of party affiliation. When billions of dollars are stolen from taxpayer-funded programs meant to help vulnerable children, someone must be held responsible. Cruz's brilliance in this exchange lies in his refusal to let Weissman hide behind careful lawyer speak and institutional deflection. Every time the public citizen co-president attempted to pivot toward criticizing the Trump administration or broadening the conversation beyond Minnesota, Cruz brought him back to the central question: will you hold Democrats accountable with the same vigor you apply to Republicans? This isn't partisan hackery, it's demanding consistency and integrity from an organization that claims to champion democracy itself. The senator's hypothetical about Governor Walz and Attorney General Ellison wasn't a rhetorical trick, it was a legitimate test of Weissman's principles. If these officials knew about fraud, benefited from it through bundled votes and campaign contributions, and deliberately looked away, that represents a betrayal of public trust at the highest level. Cruz was asking for a simple acknowledgement that such conduct would be criminal, and Weissman's reluctance to give a straightforward answer spoke volumes. Perhaps most devastating was Cruz's observation that Weissman had a chance to take a principled stand, but instead chose to defend the indefensible to benefit his political allies. When faced with evidence of fake daycare centers with blacked-out windows, no children, no toys, and no actual operations receiving millions in taxpayer funds, Weissman suggested these might be legitimate facilities that simply don't open their doors to strangers. This kind of institutional defensiveness is exactly what enables fraud to flourish and public trust to erode. Ted Cruz proved once again why he's one of the most effective questioners in the Senate, someone willing to cut through the noise and demand real answers to real questions about real crimes. That's leadership.